Hi, good morning. It is 9:30. I'm Beth Webb and I've come to tell you some more stories. This morning I'm going to do The Sword in the Stone, the King Arthur story. I love doing King Arthur. I do it for children as well as grown-ups. One of the best tellings I ever did, the one that gave me most fun, was working for English Heritage. And a friend and I went up to Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, and there we dressed up in medieval costume, and we took a load of children all round the castle, looking at the ruins but discussing what they might have been like, but also telling the story of King Arthur, because King Arthur, it's said, was born at Tintagel Castle. And so we imagined his mother, Queen Igraine, at the castle in Tintagel, and we imagined how he was born and how he was taken away to a safe place. And we just went all around the castle but used it to imagine various events from Arthur's life. And I think that was the most exciting telling of Arthur I've ever done. It was wonderful. It took all morning, but it was such huge fun. This is The Sword in the Stone for Bergland in Iceland and for Arthur Collins, so he knows what he's got to live up to. When Prince Arthur was born in Tintagel in Cornwall, the world was at war. His queen, Queen Igraine, his mother, Queen Igraine, wanted Arthur to grow up somewhere safe and unafraid. So she sent for the wizard Merlin and said, "Merlin, please take my baby somewhere, foster him with a good, kind family who will look after him, but well away from this awful war." And so Merlin agreed. One stormy, dark night, he took the baby well wrapped up and put him in a big willow basket with strong handles, and then Merlin carried him down to the sea's edge. The wind flapped at his cloak, the waves crashed around his feet, but Merlin said some words of power and transformed himself into a huge black bird. And then, taking the basket in his great talons, he spread his wings and he flew through the battering wind and over the crashing waves north to Wales. Eventually he came to the castle of his friend Sir Ector. Now Sir Ector was a good man, a faithful knight, one who had always followed King Uther honestly and lovingly, and had been very reliable and kind. What better person to bring the young Prince Arthur up? Even better, Sir Ector had a son himself, Kay, and Kay was about 4 years older than Arthur, so he'd have a big brother. Ector never breathed a word of who Arthur was. He was just a young boy that he'd promised to take in and raise as his own. Kay, it was certain, would become a knight one day, but, well, nobody really knew who Arthur was, so he grew up expecting to be Sir Kay's squire when he became knighted. The boys played together. Everything that Kay said Arthur had to do. Kay was a little bit of a bully, but he wasn't really unkind. He was just a bit big brotherish. And they both learned jousting and sword fighting, horse riding, hunting. And they also learned the law, how to be good and kind lords, and how to look after people. And so they grew, until one day, when Arthur was 14 and Kay was 18, and Kay was already hoping that he'd be knighted soon, the news came to Ector's castle that King Uther had died. And Merlin had commanded that all knights and nobles must gather in London for a great tournament just after Christmas to announce the name of the new king. Well, Sir Ector and everybody in his castle were all abuzz. Ector had a brand new suit of armour made for Kay because Kay was bound to be knighted at this tournament. And for Arthur, he had a set of squire's silks made in Kay's colours. And so wherever Kay went in his armour on his magnificent horse, Arthur would follow, dressed in Kay's colours and riding a still good but not quite so posh horse. Kay was full of excitement. This was going to be the tournament of a lifetime. This was going to be magnificent. He was going to unhorse his opponent and he was going to be knighted. Arthur was pleased because Kay was pleased. And a trip to London, he'd never been to London before. This was really exciting. So Ector, Kay and Arthur set off with their servants and their baggage on a wagon. It took several weeks to get to London, but they arrived a day or two before the tournament. They found an inn and settled in. But the day before the tournament, Merlin summoned all the nobles to a meeting at Westminster Abbey, which wasn't as big and grand as the abbey we know now, but it was there. Merlin didn't invite the nobles in, but made them stand outside. And he stood by the door, and by his side was a huge grey stone. And Merlin had in his hand a magnificent sword. It had a jewelled hilt, and it gleamed in the sunshine. "Well," said Merlin, "I've gathered you all here to tell you something very important. Although we are going to have jousting and tournaments and all sorts of festivities, the way we are going to choose the king won't be by the winner at the tournaments, but it will be by who can draw this sword from this stone." And with that, Merlin took the sword and he plunged it deep into the stone. "Now," he said, "I know for certain that Uther had a son. I'm also pretty sure he's here. He may not be in this crowd, but he is here. And so whoever can draw the sword from the stone will be Uther's son. I've put a spell on it so that nobody else can pull it out." Well, there were gasps and moans and grumbles in the crowd. "How are we going to know it's Uther? How are we going to know it's Uther's son? It could be anybody. Anybody can pull that sword out. It's not that difficult." Merlin smiled and stepped back and said, "Try." Well, one or two of the big burly knights with lots and lots of muscles came forward, and they grabbed the sword and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled, and they said, I need to go home and do some exercises, a bit of warm-up exercises, then I can do it." And some of the younger knights came forward, some of the squires, even some of the ladies who were there, and even a very brave young milkmaid. She thought she'd made it wobble a bit, good for her. But nobody could pull the sword from the stone. Merlin just stood by with his arms crossed, smiling. "Never mind," he said, "I am certain Uther's son will appear. Now go back to your inns and I will see you at the joust tomorrow." Well, Arthur and Kay had not been there because they had been looking after Kay's armour to make sure it didn't squeak and make sure everything was polished as well as it could be. But Ector came home and looked thoughtfully at Arthur and wondered. In the morning, Arthur helped Kay get into his armour, as a good squire should. He strapped on Kay's scabbard, and he was about to put the sword into Kay's hands, and he said, "One moment, I need to pull on my gauntlets before I take the sword." And then they rushed out, they went to the stables, they got their horses, which Arthur had been up at dawn, currying and combing, and until their coats gleamed. He'd saddled them, and he'd even plaited the mane on Kay's horse. It looked wonderful. And so Arthur helped Kay into the saddle, and they rode off through London, the crowds cheering, the roads almost blocked with knights and their squires. They came at last to the jousting ground, and the master of the lists announced that the knights and the young men who were hoping to become knights would be fighting in alphabetical order. First the young men who weren't knighted, and then the knights. And so the first knight would be Sir Albert against Sir Broadnose. And the third knight would be Sir Kay. Now Kay in Welsh is spelt C-A-I, not K-A-Y. And so Kay realised he was really early in the fight. Well, it was good, it didn't give him time to get nervous, but then he realised he had never picked up his sword. "Arthur," he said, "hurry back, please, quick as you can. I need my sword. I left it on the table." So Arthur ran. He was a young lad. He pushed through the crowds. He elbowed his way. He ran and ran and ran to the inn, and he knocked, but there was no one there. The doors were locked and bolted. The windows were shuttered. What could he do? But as he ran back, he had to pass Westminster Abbey, and there he saw the sword gleaming in the stone. He thought, "I wonder, it's probably a monument to King Uther, or maybe some great knight, but if I just borrow the sword so that Kay's got something, I'll return it straight away." And so, not wishing any harm, he ran up to the stone, grabbed the sword, pulled it out, easy peasy, and ran to the tournament. And he put it in Kay's hand. His name was called, and his opponent. They both rode out, raised their swords and saluted each other. And then Merlin called out, "Stop!" Everybody stopped and looked at Merlin. And Merlin said, "Young man, where did you get that sword?" And Merlin looked very hard at Kay, and Kay said, and then he remembered the rumours he had heard that morning about a sword in a stone. And he said, "I pulled it out of the stone by the abbey." Merlin looked at Kay very hard and said, "Very well, young man. We will go back to the abbey and you will show us all how you did it." Well, Kay looked very nervous, and he looked at his father and he looked at Arthur, who hung his head. He wasn't going to argue with his master on a day like this when he was hoping to get knighted and might get some extra fame. But then Merlin led the way, and Kay followed with Arthur and Ector and everybody else who'd been hoping to fight in the jousts. They all walked through the streets of London until they came to the abbey, and there was the stone, empty. Merlin turned to Kay and said, "Put the sword back and show me how you pulled it out." Well, Kay put it back, and then he thought, well, this is going to be easy, and he pulled and he put his foot on the stone and he tugged and he wrenched his arm. He said, "I can't do it." And Merlin said, "Very well, young man, well, tell me, how did you get the sword?" Well, thought Kay, there's no point lying, especially with his father's there and he's hoping to get knighted. And so he said, "I'm sorry, Merlin, Arthur got it for me." Merlin turned to Arthur and looked at him. The young man had Uther's eyes and Igraine's mouth. It got Uther's strong hands, but the way Igraine stood. And he thought, maybe. He hadn't seen the boy since the night when he'd flown the baby all the way to Ector's castle. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But he turned to Arthur and said, "Did you draw the sword from the stone?" "Yes, sir," said Arthur. "I was going to put it back straight away, honest. I didn't mean to take anything." "That's all right," said Merlin. "That's all right. Now, pull the sword." And the crowd jeered and said, "It's only a kid." But Arthur just pulled it out like you or I might pull a knife out of butter. He held it high and said, "Have I done wrong?" And Merlin said, "No. You are Uther's son, our king." And he knelt. And one or two people in the crowd knelt, but most of them roared and jeered and said, "He is just a kid. Come on, let some of us try." So Merlin said, "Very well, but you won't do it." So Arthur put the sword back and stepped away. And one by one, everybody came forward, and they pulled and they tugged and they heaved, and some even tried to chip around the edge of the stone with their knives, but nobody managed it. And at last, after a whole morning of trying and tugging, Merlin turned to Arthur and said, "Well, young man, do it again." And this time Arthur did, and once more he held the sword high, and it gleamed in the sunshine. And everybody there could see that the young man was Uther's son. He had his dignity, his stance, his smile. And all, or nearly all, knelt and proclaimed, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Apart from one or two at the back, King Lot of Orkney and some of his sons. And they would cause trouble for Arthur later, but those stories are for another time. That day there was much cheering. They went back to the joust. It was a magnificent affair, and Arthur sat in the seat of honour next to Merlin, with Kay at his side, acting as his squire. And the following day Merlin crowned Arthur in Westminster Abbey, and that night there was feasting and dancing and singing and storytelling like it had never been seen before. And the following morning King Arthur woke to begin his reign as the finest king that Britain has ever known.